National news, U.S. Congress is returning next week, and they are going to face a tough September and not many days to get things done. There will be impeachment and spending bills. The Hill reports House Republicans are set to face two major and politically polarizing events as they return to Washington next week. September was always poised to be a busy stretch in Capitol Hill, with lawmakers staring down an end-of-the-month deadline to fund the government or risk a government shutdown. But Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the Republican from California, made an announcement to the House they could open an impeachment inquiry into President Biden as soon as this month, and that kicked the normally hectic outlook into overdrive. Those two efforts are slated to come to a head next week when McCarthy and House Republicans will have 11 legislative days to keep the government's lights on and come to some sort of consensus on a potential impeachment inquiry. Yeah, a heavy lift for a conference that has little time and large disagreements on both matters. GOP lawmakers are brushing off any concerns about taking on both of those ventures. In September, Representative Darrell Issa, the Republican from California, a 22-year veteran in the House, said that different lawmakers focus on different undertakings, allowing all of them to move forward at the same time. Quote, "We do a lot of things simultaneously. That's why we break into committees." The U.S. deficit is projected to roughly double this year. This from the Hill. U.S. deficit is projected to roughly double due to larger or higher interest rates and lower tax revenue. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, an organization that pushes for lowering the deficit, is projecting the federal deficit will double this year to a total of about $2 trillion for the fiscal year that ends September 30th. Mark Goldwine, a senior policy director at the organization, told The Hill the high interest rates, lower tax revenues, and high inflation resulting in Social Security and Medicare costs have all contributed to the rising deficit. A big part of the story is just that there was sort of a one-time huge revenue surge in 2022. That's done, said Goldwine. But the other stories are that we have structural deficits rising in 2023. And a lot of that is because of interest costs. These things add up, he said. It's one thing that's causing us to go from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. It's like six things. It's not just one thing. It's like six of them. The Congressional Budget Office estimated last month the federal budget deficit reached $1.6 trillion in the 10-month era that involved spending and borrowing in that year. In 2020, the deficit hit $3.1 trillion. In 2021, $2.8. Elsewhere in Washington, D.C., the COVID resurgence is happening. The First Lady has come down with COVID for a second time. First Lady Jill Biden tested positive for COVID-19. This happened yesterday, while President Joe Biden remains negative for the virus. The First Lady is currently experiencing only mild symptoms, her communications director, Elizabeth Alexander, said in a statement. Jill Biden is remaining at the Biden vacation home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where the couple was staying over the Labor Day weekend. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that President Biden was administered a COVID test yesterday following the First Lady's positive test, and that he tested negative. Jean-Pierre, in a statement, said the president will test at a regular cadence this week and monitor for symptoms. Dr. Anthony Fauci is back in the news. In a Saturday interview, the former White House chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, spoke out in defense of masking up amid today's rising COVID cases. In the event that masks are again recommended, he is, quote, concerned that people will not abide by the recommendations. He said in the interview, he continued, I hope that we get to the point where the volume of cases is such and organizations like the CDC recommends, CDC does not mandate anything, recommends that people wear masks. I would hope that people abide by that recommendation and take into account the risks to themselves and their family, Fauci was speaking to CNN. In January of 2023, a study named the Cochrane Study, led by 12 researchers from esteemed universities around the world, compared the use of medical and surgical masks to wearing no masks where COVID was concerned. The review found that, quote, wearing a mask may have little or no difference in how many people caught a flu-like illness, COVID-like studies, COVID-like illnesses, 9 studies, 276,917 people, and probably makes little or no difference in how many people have the flu or COVID, confirmed by a laboratory test, 6 studies, 13,919 people. In other words, this was a compilation of many studies, but it came out that it really doesn't make any difference whether you wear a mask or not. As we discussed earlier today, the Attorney General of Texas is facing impeachment today. The Texas Senate has convened as a high court to consider the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton, the Republican firebrand accused by his own party of taking bribes and abusing his office. Paxton was 60 years old, or is 60 years old, has spent the past decade as the right's chief legal attack dog, fighting many of President Donald Trump's battles from Austin, Texas. Lawsuits to overturn the Affordable Care Act, legal protections for undocumented migrants brought to the U.S. as children, commonly known as Dreamers, and the result of the 2020 election made him a popular force for the right even after he was indicted for securities fraud. But his political support fractured this year when the Republican-controlled Texas House of Representatives voted 121-23 to impeach him on charges of abuse and bribery. Paxton, only the third official in Texas history to be impeached, has denied wrongdoing and vowed to fight the charges in a trial that promises to be a political spectacle as it threatens to tear his party in two. It's not a criminal trial. It's not a civil trial. It's a political trial, said Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in an interview with Fox 26 in Houston, the local television station there this summer. Patrick is a powerful Republican president of the state Senate. He will preside over the high court as judge. 31 Texas senators, the majority of them Republicans, will serve as jury considering opening and closing arguments, witness testimony, cross-examination, and 20 articles of impeachment. Elsewhere in Texas, nearly 24 people were injured after a vehicle crashed into a Denny's restaurant in Texas. This from ABC News. The vehicle plowed through the building's wall late yesterday morning, according to the Rosenberg Fire Department and Police Department. Police said they received multiple 911 calls about the incident at approximately 11:22 a.m. 23 people inside the restaurant suffered injuries ranging from minor to serious. All were transported to local hospitals with what appeared to be non-life-threatening injuries, according to authorities. The driver was not hurt. The investigation into the cause of the action is ongoing at this time, said Rosenberg Police in a statement. Out of Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin had a student that was severely beaten, is now in critical condition. Wisconsin police say that a female University of Wisconsin student was severely beaten in Madison. This happened early Sunday morning, prompting increased police presence in the area. Police responded to the incident at around 3:20 a.m. on Sunday. The victim suffered life-threatening injuries. This appears to be a stranger attack. We are connecting her friends and family with any support or resources they may need, said the police. A friend of the victim told WISN 12 that she had been strangled, beaten, and sexually assaulted. UW-Madison sent an email out to the school community about the incident, confirming that the suspect is still at large. Out of Florida today, this from USA Today, a state judge over the weekend rejected congressional district boundaries affecting communities across northern Florida, saying they unconstitutionally restrict black voting power and that Florida's legislature must redraw them. By dismantling a congressional district that enabled black voters to elect their candidates of choice under the previous plan, the enacted plan violates the Florida Constitution. This from Circuit Judge J. Lee Marsh in Tallahassee. In the 55-page ruling, he also noted throughout history, quote, Florida has been a state home to discrimination in voting. Marsh barred state officials from holding elections that use the current boundaries developed to replace the former Congressional District 5, whose seat was held by former U.S. Representative Al Lawson. Weighing a lawsuit brought by groups including Black Votes Matter and the League of Women Voters of Florida, the judge said the state lawmakers must develop a remedial map to comply with the state's constitution and retain control. The judge retained control of the case to judge whether the new boundaries will pass legal muster. In a court at a little higher level, the Supreme Court of the United States, USA Today, is pondering whether a police dog can violate the Constitution. Here's what they say. The problem for Nero the police dog began when he put his paws on the door of a car that had been pulled over after the driver suddenly swerved across 3 lanes. By all accounts, the Belgian Malinois did his job, sniffing out a pill bottle and a plastic bag that contained meth residue, evidence that ultimately allowed the police in Idaho to get a warrant and charge the driver, Kirby Dorff, with felony drug possession. But the paws that Nero placed on the driver's side of the door as he jumped up to get a better sniff have opened a constitutional question that has now reached the Supreme Court of the United States, whether the dog's mere touching of the car violated the Fourth Amendment prohibition on unreasonable searches. Idaho's top court concluded in March that Nero's exuberance amounted to a warrantless search and tossed Dorff's conviction. The Supreme Court this year testing the power of law enforcement under the Fourth Amendment when they approach vehicles. They have a couple of other cases. One deals with an officer who spotted a joint under a driver's seat after the car door was left open. Another challenges San Diego's practice of chalking tires for parking enforcement. Some sports news today. For the first time in 34 years, Duke football has beaten a top 10 football team. This from USA Today. It was a 28-7 win against number 9 Clemson. It happened Monday night, last night at Wallace Wade Stadium. The Blue Devils snapped a streak that went back 12,392 days. Duke last beat a top 10 opponent with a 21-17 win against number 7 Clemson on September 30th, 1989 under Steve Spurrier. And finally, Coach Deion Sanders, Prime, has led his team to a win over TCU, Colorado Buffaloes. And Shadur Sanders, the Suns' coach, threw for 510 yards with 4 touchdowns. The game winner with a 46-yard catch and run by freshman Dylan Edwards with 4:25 left. The Buffaloes pulled off a 45-42 win over TCU. And that is the front page for this Tuesday, September 5th, 2023.